The note fell out of Elsie's backpack, turning my routine evening upside down. Just an innocent slip of paper, but those few scribbled words shattered my world. "What's this?" I held up the crumpled note, my heart pounding. Elsie looked up from her homework with a deer-in-headlights expression. "I don't know, Mom. Maybe it got stuck in there by accident." Her voice shook ever so slightly. Nathan glanced over, his eyebrows knitting together. "Everything okay?" Before I could respond, he snatched the note from my hand and read it silently. A flicker of recognition flashed across his face, but he quickly composed himself. "It's nothing important," he said dismissively, crumpling the paper. "You both are overreacting." My pulse quickened as anger bubbled up. "Don't lie to me, Nathan. What is this about?" He held up his palms defensively. "Mara, please, not in front of Elsie." I opened my mouth to protest, but Elsie cut me off. "Dad's right, Mom. It's probably nothing." The hurt in her eyes gave me pause. Why was she defending him? Didn't she realize how serious this could be? I took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm brewing inside me. "We'll discuss this later." I shot Nathan a pointed look, then turned back to the half-prepared dinner on the counter. The rest of the evening stretched out in tense silence. I caught Elsie and Nathan sharing subtle glances when they thought I wasn't looking. A sick feeling twisted in my gut. They were clearly hiding something from me. After Elsie went up to her room, I rounded on Nathan. "What the hell was that note about?" He avoided my gaze, fidgeting with his whiskey glass. "I told you, it's nothing to worry over." "Don't insult my intelligence." I slammed my palm on the kitchen counter. "I'm not an idiot, Nathan. I know when you're lying to me." Finally, he met my fiery stare, his expression unreadable. "You really want to go down this road?" The chill in his tone sent a shiver down my spine. This wasn't just about some random note. There was something much bigger going on here. I swallowed hard, steadying my nerves. "If it involves my daughter, you're damn right I do." Nathan simply shook his head slowly, an inscrutable look on his face. "You may regret that." With that ominous warning hanging in the air, he brushed past me and headed upstairs, leaving me alone with a sinking feeling of dread. As I cleaned up the remains of our dinner, my mind raced with possibilities. What secret was Nathan hiding? And why did it seem to involve Elsie? A hard knot formed in the pit of my stomach. This had all the makings of a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. One thing was certain. I wouldn't rest until I uncovered the truth, no matter how painful it might be. If keeping Elsie safe meant taking on my own husband, then so be it. This was just the beginning. Over the next few weeks, Elsie transformed into someone I barely recognized. The sweet, loving daughter I once knew was gone, replaced by a sullen, withdrawn stranger. Whenever I tried talking to her, she brushed me off with curt replies or icy silence. Her usual bright smile had turned into a perpetual scowl. More than once, I caught her shooting me looks of pure venom when she thought I couldn't see. The dramatic shift in her behavior broke my heart. But I knew exactly who was to blame, Nathan. I didn't have proof, but my gut told me he was poisoning Elsie against me, some twisted form of revenge. One night, after an especially tense dinner, I finally managed to corner Elsie alone in the living room. "Honey, please talk to me. What's going on?" She glared at me, her eyes smoldering with resentment. "You really want to know? Fine, I'll tell you." Taking a deep breath, she launched into a blistering tirade about how I was a horrible, controlling mother who didn't really love her. The vitriol in her words sliced me to my core. "Where is this coming from?" I cried when she finally paused. "You know that's not true." Elsie shook her head slowly, her expression one of pure disgust. "If you can't see it, then you're even more messed up than I thought." Before I could respond, she stormed out of the room, leaving me shaking with a bone-deep chill. It was one thing to argue with Nathan, but having Elsie turn so completely against me? That's when I knew things had gone way too far. The next day, I barged into Nathan's home office, my anger bubbling over. "What the hell did you say to Elsie?" He regarded me with an infuriatingly smug look. "I simply helped her see the truth about you." My hands balled into fists at my sides. "You son of a bitch, how dare you turn my own daughter against me?" That only made him chuckle darkly. Well, the claws finally came out. I was wondering how long it would take for your true nature to reveal itself. Suddenly it all became clear. This was his latest twisted game, the cruelest one yet. By brainwashing Elsie, He was trying to make me the enemy, likely to cover for his own misdeeds. "You're a sick, manipulative bastard," I seethed, fighting back angry tears. "I don't know what you're playing at, but I swear to God, you're going to regret this." His only response was a slow, sinister smile, like a predator who'd just cornered its prey. A cold shiver raced down my spine. In that moment, I didn't even recognize the man I'd once loved. As I turned to leave, he called out in that same sickly sweet tone, "Oh, and Mara, I got Elsie a little present she's going to love. Maybe she'll let you see it if you're lucky." The undisguised malice in his voice made my blood run cold. Nathan wasn't just messing with Elsie's feelings anymore. He was exerting control over her through gifts and favors, cementing her loyalty to him. Right then, I vowed to put a stop to his twisted games once and for all, no matter what it took. If I had to destroy him to save my daughter, then that's what I would do. The gloves were finally off, and God help anyone who stood in a vengeful mother's way. With Nathan's taunting words still ringing in my ears, I knew I had to act fast before whatever twisted scheme he was cooking up went too far. If he thought buying Elsie's affection with gifts would drive a wedge between us, he was dead wrong. The first step was getting to the bottom of his shady financial dealings. I may have been a housewife, but I wasn't an idiot. Those big money transfers he'd tried to hide had to be important. That night, I waited until Nathan was fast asleep, then crept into his home office and fired up his computer. After retrieving his banking passwords from a sticky note, I quickly pulled up his accounts. My jaw dropped at what I found. Random 5- and 6-figure transfers to a private investigator, dating back over a year. Just what kind of twisted secrets was this man digging up? A cold knot formed in the pit of my stomach as I realized this wasn't just about money. Not with those kinds of astronomical fees. When I searched the PI's name online, everything became horrifyingly clear. Nathan had hired him to trail someone, likely spying on them for months. As I scrolled through the sordid details of what these kind of firms were capable of, it made me feel sick. Just what had that bastard gotten himself into? I must have made some noise, because Nathan suddenly appeared in the doorway, bleary-eyed but quickly becoming alert when he saw what I'd discovered. "You just couldn't leave well enough alone, could you, Mara?" His tone dripped with menace as he stalked towards me. I stood my ground, years of bottled rage finally unleashing. "I should have known you were hiding something, you lying sack of shit. What's this investigation really about? Who are you having followed?" A slow, sinister grin spread across his face. "Why don't you ask your precious daughter? I'm sure she'd be glad to tell you all about the sleazy affair her daddy's been having." The words hit me like a ton of bricks, leaving me dizzy and disoriented. An affair? After everything we'd been through, he'd been betraying me this whole time? Almost as bad was the thought of dragging Elsie into this sordid mess. How could any loving father put his child through such an ugly, traumatic situation? You bastard," I spat through gritted teeth, hands trembling with fury. "Elsie is never going to want anything to do with you after she finds out what you've done." Nathan's rancid chuckle made my skin crawl. "Actually, your little girl is the one who discovered my affair first. At least, that's what I told her. I may have embellished a few details to turn her against you." "You're a monster," I screeched, launching myself at him in a blind rage. We grappled briefly until Nathan pinned me against the wall, his forearm crushing my windpipe. Up close, I could see the deranged glint in his cold, dead eyes. "That's right, I am a monster," he hissed in my ear, spittle flying. "And you're the fool who stuck by me for all these years despite it. Well, no more. This is my world now, and in my world, you and your brat daughter don't get to call the shots." With those chilling words still echoing in my mind, Nathan flung me away from him like a rag doll. I collapsed in a heap, gasping and wheezing, as he stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind him. In that moment, I realized the full depth of the nightmare I was trapped in. But there was no waking up. This was my harsh reality. Nathan's sick betrayal and twisted hatred were all too real. And if he thought turning Elsie against me was the worst he could do, he was about to find out how wrong he was. Screw being the bigger person. It was time to fight monster with monster. The next morning, I barged into Nathan's office again, my head still pounding from the previous night's confrontation. I wasn't about to let that bastard slither his way out of taking responsibility. "We need to talk," I said in a tone that brooked no argument. "Now." Nathan glanced up from his laptop, that same smarmy grin plastered across his face. Well, if it isn't the woman scorned herself, to what do I owe this pleasure?" "Cut the crap, Nathan," I bit out through clenched teeth. "I know all about your sordid affair and the investigator you hired, and if you think turning Elsie against me is going to stop me from exposing you, you're sadly mistaken." To my surprise, he let out a hearty chuckle and leaned back in his chair. "You always did have a flair for the dramatics, dear, though I have to say, this new vengeful persona of yours is quite—" He swept his gaze over me lecherously. "Tantalizing." I recoiled in disgust. "Don't you dare try and play games with me. I'm not one of your cheap, floozy mistresses you can just charm and manipulate." That finally seemed to wipe the smirk off his face. Nathan's expression turned flinty as he sat up straighter. "You're right, you're not one of them." His tone dripped with venom. "You're just the sad, dowdy wife I've been stuck with for over 15 miserable years, while those women gave me what I actually wanted." The cruel dig landed like a physical blow, leaving me stunned and shaken. How could the man I once loved say such hateful things? Nathan clearly savored my stricken expression because he pressed on mercilessly. "Face it, Mara, you never made me happy. Not like Trixie or Bianca or that redhead from accounting. Those women indulged my needs, my desires, while you just nagged and complained and let yourself go." My cheeks burned with shame and hatred as tears stung my eyes. I wanted nothing more than to claw that smugly handsome face of his until it was a bloody wreck. But I couldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing me come undone. Pulling myself upright, I met his cold sneer with a glare of pure, icy loathing. "You're going to regret every vile word, Nathan. I'm taking you for everything you're worth in the divorce. The house, the cars, every last penny of your assets and investments." For the first time, I detected a flicker of unease in his eyes. Good. Maybe I'd finally landed a chink in his armor. "You wouldn't dare," he snarled, sitting forward aggressively. "I'll bury you in court and make sure you never see a dime or Elsie again." I couldn't stop the cruel smile from spreading across my face. "Oh, I have a feeling the judge will be very interested to see all the evidence of your lurid affairs, along with those shady financial transactions to your little PI buddy." The blood drained from Nathan's face as the reality sank in. I had him by the throat, and we both knew it. He was finally the one being outmaneuvered and outwitted for once. "You're bluffing," he muttered weakly. "You don't have proof of any of that garbage." Reaching into my purse, I pulled out a thumb drive and set it on his desk with a thud. Every last tawdry detail, all there in black and white. I've got it all, Nathan. The affairs, the money trail, even a few pretty incriminating photos. Everything I need to destroy you utterly. For a long moment, we just stared each other down in tense silence. Finally, I allowed myself a thin, humorless smile. "Bet you're regretting turning my daughter against me now, aren't you, dear husband? Because this," I hooked a thumb at the damning evidence, "is what a vengeful mother looks like when she's been crossed for the last time." With that parting shot, I spun on my heel and marched out, leaving Nathan to stew in the ashes of his ruined life. He wanted to go nuclear and strip me of everything? Well, two could play at that game, and this time I had no intention of letting the bastard win. With Nathan's pathetic blubbering still ringing in my ears, I got to work putting my plan for total destruction into motion. The first step was compiling an airtight evidence file on his affairs and shady dealings to take to my divorce lawyer. I spent hours hunched over my laptop, meticulously organizing everything from incriminating texts and emails to damning financial statements. Explicit photos of Nathan with his mistresses, complete with date and time stamps. Phone records showing his frequent late-night meetings when he claimed to be working. It was all in there, leaving no room for doubt about what a lying, cheating snake he really was. With each new piece of irrefutable proof I uncovered, my rage burned hotter and brighter. How could this man, who'd once professed his undying love for me, have betrayed our vows in such a cruel, calculating way, year after year of deception, while I played the oblivious, dutiful wife? Well, consider the blinders off now, you bastard. Once I had everything organized to leave no stone unturned, I reached out to an old friend, Liz, a savvy divorce attorney with a knack for going for the jugular. We went to college together, and she'd helped me through more than one crisis back in our partying days. If anyone could guide me through dismantling Nathan's life, it was her. Liz's sculpted eyebrows shot up when I laid out the full sordid details during our meeting. Damn, Mara. I knew Nathan was a prick, but I never figured him for such a twisted dirtbag. I gave her a humorless smile. Welcome to my world. So you think we have a solid case to take him for everything he's worth? Oh, definitely, she said with relish, poring over my damning file. Adultery, misappropriation of assets, alienation of affection from his kid. We can really stick it to this scumbag on multiple fronts. He's not going to know what hit him. Despite the dire circumstances, I felt a spark of vicious satisfaction at her confidence. Screw turning the other cheek. It was time to channel my inner fury and make Nathan bleed for his sins. Excellent. I want you to draw up the paperwork for divorce proceedings right away, citing infidelity and irretrievable emotional damage. Request an emergency custody order, too, so I can get Elsie away from that toxic environment. Liz flashed me a wicked grin. You got it, sister. We're going to burn this asshole's world to the ground. With the legal wheels now in motion, I turned my attention to dismantling Nathan's social life and reputation. A couple glasses of wine later, I started drafting an email to his boss, family members, even the country club board. In cold, dispassionate language, I laid out the basics of his sordid affairs, leaving no ambiguity about what a deceitful, unrepentant philanderer he truly was. Classic Nathan, the charismatic family man on the outside, but rotten to the core behind closed doors. Well, those doors were about to be blown wide open. With the send button clicked, I sat back with a grim smile, imagining the escalating shockwaves as word of Nathan's misdeeds rippled through his circles. The embarrassing phone calls and meetings, the disgusted looks and shunnings from folks who'd once sung his praises. My finger hovered over the keyboard as I prepared to share the most damaging pieces of evidence, those lurid photographs that would leave no doubt about his betrayal. A final nail in the coffin of the perfect life he'd constructed from lies. Part of me recoiled at the thought of such public nuclear warfare against my own husband. But the moment passed quickly, replaced with a blazing sense of righteous fury. Nathan hadn't just shattered our marriage vows, he'd turned my own daughter against me in some twisted game of vengeance. Well, now it was my turn to hit back twice as hard. If all-out Armageddon was what it took to regain Elsie's trust and respect, then so be it. The tough love approach it was. With a few more keystrokes, I sent the first barrage of humiliating evidence sailing through cyberspace to ravage Nathan's life. More would follow, a steady drumbeat of leaks and revelations, until there was nothing left of the pedestal he'd built for himself. Let the games begin, asshole. This time, I'm playing for keeps, and I don't intend to lose. Over the next few days, the shockwaves from my opening salvo reverberated through Nathan's life with brutal force. I could practically taste the schadenfreude as his righteous facade crumbled piece by piece. The first fissures appeared quickly, based on the sudden rash of unknown numbers blowing up my phone. I didn't need to answer to know who was on the other end. Nathan's former friends, colleagues, and sycophants demanding explanations for his appalling behavior. A small, vindictive part of me enjoyed listening to their increasingly frantic voicemails as the revelations sank in. The confusion and righteous indignation swiftly giving way to disgust and ostracization once the irrefutable evidence hit home. No more benefit of the doubt for the great Nathan Clark. Within 48 hours, his phone had gone silent, the crowds flocking to bask in his reflected glow, now cutting him off like a cancer. Just as swiftly, people scrubbed their social media histories of any association with him, like he'd never existed in the first place. The sweetest moment came when I received an irate call from his boss at a prestigious investment firm. Apparently, one of the incriminating videos had made the rounds of the entire office and C-suite before I could even blink, the ultimate kiss of death in that white-collar world. Nathan's been summarily terminated, effective immediately, the sputtering executive informed me in clipped tones, clearly repulsed by the details of his disgraced employee's transgressions. We simply cannot abide that kind of personal conduct from our senior leadership. His reputational stain has dealt the company irreparable harm. I had to choke back a gloating laugh at the sheer, delicious irony. All of Nathan's grandiose self-importance and posturing about being a respected pillar of the community shattered in an instant by a single video of his seedier exploits. Not that I was done twisting the knife deeper. Over the next few days, I continued feeding the fire, leaking out bits and pieces of intel to fan the raging blaze. More videos, salacious texts with his mistresses, receipts detailing the money trails. No stone was left unturned in dismantling Nathan's tawdry double life. Through it all, there was not a single peep from the disgraced man himself. No denials, no attempts at pity gambits or reconciliation. Just deafening silence and a conspicuous absence, as he no doubt stewed in the rubble of the existence he'd so painstakingly constructed through lies. Coward. Running and hiding from the fallout of his own misdeeds. How typical. I supposed I shouldn't have expected anything less from such a spineless, self-serving worm at this point. Finally, just when the chaos surrounding Nathan's fall from grace began to die down, he resurfaced for a final doomed act of defiance. I'd just finished putting Elsie to bed one night when my cell phone rang. Before I could silence it, his familiar number flashed across the screen. Against my better judgment, I answered. The moment I heard Nathan's voice on the other end, something inside me hardened like steel. "Enough, Mara," he growled, his usual unflappable smoothness having deserted him. "You've had your fun tearing me down, didn't you? Well, I hope you're satisfied, you spiteful witch. You've destroyed everything I ever worked for." A blistering sense of satisfaction washed over me at the anguish and defeat dripping from his words. Good. He deserved to feel that soul-crushing devastation tenfold for what he'd put Elsie and me through. "On the contrary, dear husband," I purred in sugary tones, unable to resist a final twist of the knife. "I feel like I'm just getting started unraveling the stain you left on this family. But since you asked so nicely, no, I'm not satisfied at all." There was a long pause, followed by a guttural noise of rage. "What the hell else could you possibly want from me? Haven't you taken enough?" My lips curved into a smile utterly devoid of warmth. "Why, I want everything, Nathan. Everything. And when this is all over, you're going to have less than nothing to show for your betrayal. Bank on that." Ending the call with a soft click, the thrill of complete victory coursed through my veins. There would be no peace treaties, no compromise or mercy for the bastard. I'd reached the point of no return. Only through Nathan's total and utter destruction could my family's honor be restored. So be it, then. I would see this scorched earth campaign through to its bitter, ruthless end until not a single remnant of his shattered life remained standing. That was my solemn promise to myself, Elsie, and any other daughter who'd been failed and betrayed by the man who was supposed to love them unconditionally. The reckoning had only just begun, and God help anyone caught in the crossfire of a vengeful mother's wrath. Despite his blustering threats, Nathan's retaliation attempts were about as feeble as you'd expect from a beaten dog. A few incoherent, rage-filled voicemails and emails soon dribbled to nothing, as the weight of his catastrophic decisions crushed his spirit completely. With the constant drip of new revelations pouring gas on the raging inferno, Nathan lost whatever shreds of respect and credibility he had left. All those powerful connections and insider relationships he'd carefully cultivated over the years, wiped out with brutal efficiency as every last one of his associates distanced themselves. It was almost impressive, in a twisted way, just how swiftly the mighty fell once the veil was torn away, especially for someone like Nathan who'd gotten away with his deviant behavior for so long. All it took was a few well-placed leaks of evidence to his former inner circle, and they abandoned him like rats fleeing a sinking ship. I had to chuckle at the irony as the news dropped of his ouster from the prestigious country club, that once hallowed bastion of old-money elitism he'd clawed his way into. According to the scorched earth email I received from the petrified board members, he was being unceremoniously stripped of his membership, effective immediately. His ungentlemanly and unconscionable conduct would no longer be tolerated, and just like that, he'd gone from living in the lap of luxury to persona non grata, all within a few action-packed weeks. a well-deserved punishment for someone who thought he could play by his own rules indefinitely while the people he was supposed to cherish most suffered his betrayals in silence. With his professional and social life in smoldering ruins, Nathan turned one last time to repairing his most prized relationship, his twisted bond with Elsie. I'll never forget the haunted look in her eyes the day he crawled back into our lives, sniveling and begging for forgiveness. "My dearest Elsie, you have to believe your father. Everything your mother has told you about me is lies," he blubbered, utterly debased, as he got on his knees. "She's the one who's been unfaithful and manipulative all these years. I've tried so hard to be a good man, but she's destroying me out of spite." I'll give my daughter credit. She didn't immediately recoil in horror and disgust like I did. Instead, Elsie stared down at Nathan with eyes as cold and pitiless as stone, her jaw setting in a hard line. "You're pathetic, you know that?" Her voice dripped with contempt. "Did you really think groveling and crying would work after what you've done? That I'd be stupid enough to fall for your lies after everything Mom showed me?" Nathan's already ashen face turned a ghastly shade of white at the razor-edge dismissal in Elsie's tone. But I'm your father. I've always loved you more than anything." "Save it," Elsie snapped, cutting him off. "I don't know how I could have ever loved the disgusting, selfish creature standing in front of me now. You're not my father. Not anymore." Those words seemed to rob Nathan of what little remained of his spirit. Slumped on his knees, shoulders shaking with silent sobs, he looked like a broken, feeble old man, instead of the arrogant titan who once bestrode his world with such confidence. I almost felt a pang of pity watching the pathetic spectacle, right up until my gaze drifted to Elsie again. She returned my glance with an unwavering look of pure, unbridled pride that sent a surge of joy through my heart. In that moment, I knew I'd finally succeeded where it mattered most, protecting my daughter from her father's sickness and showing her the consequences of his unforgivable actions. Nathan had tried to turn us against each other in the cruelest way possible, and like the master manipulator he was, he still couldn't comprehend how thoroughly he'd failed. As the wretched, blubbering shell of a man who I once knew collapsed to the floor in despair, no longer worth the energy of our hatred or scorn, I reached out and gave Elsie's hand a firm, reassuring squeeze. No words were needed. That simple gesture spoke volumes of everything we'd endured together and overcome. The nightmare was finally over. Nathan's world had been utterly shattered, just as he deserved. Now, at long last, my daughter and I could begin picking up the pieces and rebuilding our lives free from his toxic, traumatic influences. The future was uncertain, but at least we had each other again. And this time, nothing and no one would ever come between a mother's enduring love for her child. In the aftermath of Nathan's devastating downfall, an uneasy silence fell over our household, like the dead calm after a massive storm, where you're left to survey the wreckage and debris in stunned disbelief. Those first few days and weeks passed by in a blur of numbness. I floated through the motions of taking the next legal steps to cement Nathan's excision from our lives. The temporary restraining order, filing for an uncontested divorce, updating my new single status. At Elsie's request, we boxed up every last remnant of his belongings in existence under our roof. Photos, clothing, personal effects, all went into storage, stripped away without ceremony or remorse. My daughter's cold efficiency in erasing every trace of her father chilled me to the bone. As badly as Nathan's betrayal and depravity had cut both of us, it clearly ran soul-deep for Elsie. My heart broke watching her purge so ruthlessly, tamping down the hurt and vulnerability until her face was an impenetrable mask. "It's like he never even existed," she muttered tonelessly as we taped up the last box of Nathan's things. "Good riddance to that miserable bastard." I fought back a shudder at her toxic vehemence, worlds apart from the sweet, joyful girl she'd been not so long ago. In driving my daughter to such levels of bitterness and cynicism, Nathan had inflicted damage far crueler than any mere physical wound. Over the next few months, Elsie retreated more and more into her protective shell, snapping at me if I pushed too hard. Trying to draw her out and engage her on anything beyond the most surface levels was like butting my head against a brick wall of cold silence. "Can't you see I'm dealing with this in my own way?" she erupted during one particularly heated argument, voice dripping with exasperated disdain. Or do you need to control that too, like you control everything else around here? The look of betrayal in her eyes as she stormed off cut me to the core. I knew she was still hurting and lashing out, that the pain from Nathan's manipulations hadn't fully healed. But having my own daughter's anger and resentment directed at me after all we'd been through felt like the ultimate slap in the face. In my bleakest moments, I wondered if gaining freedom from Nathan's toxic influences was worth losing the close mother-daughter bond I'd once cherished so dearly. I'd done what I'd sworn to do, and shattered that twisted pariah. But at what cost to Elsie's spirit? The answer became clear one quiet spring evening as the lengthening rays of golden sunset streamed through the living room windows. I'd been sitting and staring morosely at the box of Nathan's things, already dreading hauling it off to storage. Despite everything he'd put us through, it was still a gut-wrenching finality to purge him from our existence forever. That's when I heard the soft footsteps behind me. Elsie sank down onto the couch cushion, silent and pensive. For several long moments, neither of us spoke, the weight of past and future hanging thick in the air between us. You know? My daughter's voice was barely above a husky murmur when she finally spoke. For the longest time, I hated you for what you did to Dad. I really believed he was the victim, that poor put-upon guy who stayed faithful while his shrew of a wife ripped their family apart out of spite and jealousy. Elsie shook her head slowly, a look of what seemed like regret flickering in her eyes. But after seeing the things he did, the lies and deceit and cheating, I don't even know that man anymore. And I'm so sorry for everything I put you through, Mom. For every ugly word, every time I hurt you or pushed you away because I thought you were the enemy. She swallowed hard, blinking back tears. You were just trying to protect me from the truth all along, to keep me from being victimized by Dad's depravity, same as you were. Can you ever forgive me? The raw emotion and sincerity in Elsie's voice shattered the last of my reservations. Without a second thought, I pulled my daughter into a fierce, protective embrace, holding her shaking body as if I could physically shield her from any lingering trauma. Of course, baby, I whispered, kissing the top of her head as the tears flowed freely down my cheeks. Of course I forgive you. We'll get through this together just like we survived your father's malice, by being there for each other, no matter what. And in that moment, awash in the rediscovered bond of unconditional love, I knew everything had been worth it. The risks, the pain and heartbreak, the scorched earth vengeance, all of it was simply the price to protect my daughter from a lifetime of manipulation and subjugation under Nathan's thumb. For the first time in recent memory, my heart swelled with hope and renewal. The long, dark night of betrayal was finally behind us. A new dawn beckoned on the horizon, brimming with the promise of better days ahead, now that the demon of Nathan's corruption no longer cast its pall over our family. Whatever challenges awaited down the road, I knew Elsie and I would confront them head-on, nurturing and supporting each other through the highs and lows. No matter how bleak the path got, we would walk it together, standing united by the most powerful force in the universe, a mother's love for her child. And with that eternal, unbreakable bond as our beacon, I had no doubts we would both emerge from this crucible reborn to embrace the bright future we so richly deserved. A future free from the ruinous influences and traumatic toxicity left in Nathan's wake. A fresh start for both of us. It was the greatest gift a vengeful mother could ever hope to give her beloved daughter.